Well, thank you, Lewis. Yeah, so Lewis and I actually started discussing this topic, probably about a year ago. And then the pandemic hit, so it kind of slowed us down a bit. But, I truly believe that, one of the biggest success factors we all have, whether that be the sponsor side or the CDMO side, right, is attracting the right talent to our organizations. Right, just a little bit about Kala, right? So for some perspective, we're a very small company. We have one small product on the market, and hopefully another very soon, right? Focused on advancing treatment of the eye, right? And our manufacturing operations are completely outsourced, right? So, in the outsourced business model, whether you're a sponsor, right, or a CDMO, what are the skills and talents you need, right? And of course, people in our space, we need technical acumen, right? That's kind of table stakes, right? I think it's how most people come in to either the CDMO world or the sponsor managing the CDMO world. We need business acumen, right? And of course, we need people skills, right? And I think the distinction I'd like to bring out today is around, right, masters of skills and discipline, right, versus masters of the relationship, right, masters of the partnership. So I think they're two very different things. I've got a little anecdote. Many years ago in a prior life, I had an organization of about 20 people, and I was not happy with the way some of our partnerships were being managed. And so I brought my team off site for a day, and we did a self-assessment. And I asked them, right, to assess their own skills, right? And people skills is what I was really getting after, right? I asked them to assess their negotiation skills, their ability to manage conflict, speaking skills, and the ability to align internal and external resources. Except for 2 or 3 people, almost everyone self-evaluated themselves as terrible at those, right? The ability to manage conflict, people came out and said, I'm terrified of conflict, right? I'd rather defer it or let someone else handle it. So that was very insightful for me and told me that I needed to make some changes, either develop some people, with those skills or find some new people who could bring that to the organization, right? And what I've learned, right, not an easy task, right? And then the other question, in fact, this is a question came from the audience earlier about, mid-career changes and then corollary to the thought, right? And the answer is yes. In fact, what I've seen is, occasionally, not all the time, right, but really good careers are built by people changing roles mid-career, right? Often moving from the technical sphere to an alliance management, partnership management sphere, right? And for some people, even when they do well, it's really hard. Right? Because if you worked in a lab or in a manufacturing plant, you haven't been training on skills, negotiating and managing conflict. But I have seen, several people really succeed at that once they understand, what it's about, how much fun it can be. Technical acumen, right? That comes from academic training and experience. Again, I phrased it as table stakes, right? No one can fake that, right? We need those people, right? But business acumen, right, I think can be taught to people with technical acumen, right? Of course, the basic business concepts, time value of money, return on investment, sunk costs, right? Those kind of things, those are textbook, MBA programs or even seminars can teach those, right? And then true business acumen can be developed by applying those over time. Letting people go out and do it, right? Let them negotiate, let them evaluate a deal, right? Let them evaluate a contract. Right? But the people have to have that innate desire to want to do that, right? But so why is it hard though, right? And what I've seen, and I've seen this for many years, is many people have 1 or 2 of the critical talent, but very few people have all 3, right? And so what do we do? Because and Barry will speak in a few minutes about recruiting, right? What I've seen is that you've got to find people with one or two of the critical talents, and then be willing to teach and develop third, second, and third. Right. And especially for junior roles, if you're looking for someone with only 5 or 10 years experience, to expect them to be skilled at negotiating, managing conflict, technical acumen, ability to negotiate a contract, right? You're not going to find those, but you will find people with the desire and the talent inside to do it, right? It's just a matter of developing talent, right? So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Barry, who's our VP of HR, and he can talk about some of the strategies around recruiting these folks.
Thanks, Vin. Thanks, everybody. So a couple things. So I'd say first, Vin talked about the trifecta, right? Technical skills, business acumen, people skills. And to your point, Vin, hard to find people that have all of those. I'm going to take a step back a little bit and first talk about sort of what hasn't changed with respect to things we need to be thinking about, right? And I'll weave in some things we need to absolutely be thinking about differently. And then talk more specifically about like how do we find this talent and what do we do with them once we actually get them, right? So I'd say the things that really haven't changed as you think about recruitment is what do you need, right? Have you taken the time and not cut corners around what this job actually looks like and what the connections are you're going to need to help make for people to be in there? What are those must-have skills? And I know this sounds very fundamental, but I find quite often it's some of those basics that we miss. And then as we start embarking on a recruitment campaign, we sometimes are wondering, why are we not finding the right people? The other part I'll add to that is making sure your interviewers are thinking about and crafting the right kinds of questions that are going to get you the information you need, right? We want to do some probing to see what type of technical skills do people really have and how applicable are those skills to this job, right? How applicable is their business acumen? I agree that you can teach some of that, but then some people, there's also sort of an inherent curiosity about business, right? And you can suss that out as you're going through and kind of talking through that. As you talk about connections, right? Because the roles we're also talking about here on an outsourced basis, they're going to have a tremendous amount of interaction with external partners, right? So how do they build relationships, right? How are they going to have difficult conversations at times when they may need to, when perhaps the external partner isn't necessarily delivering what we need, right? And obviously the folks that are on an outsourced basis, they're a representation of us internally. Right, so we want to so those would be some of the backdrop, right? So those are some of the things I think that are some of the nuts and bolts kinds of things that we really need to be able to kind of look at. There was some questions in here about, how do you target these people, right? And that's not easy, right? And I don't think there's any simple answer to that per se. Although what I would say, what I found to be really successful over the years is I think business associations are a great place to look. I'm also a huge proponent. I've gotten a lot of candidates over the years of joining various LinkedIn groups. So yes, post, but join manufacturing groups. Join some of those groups that are out there, and you can post your jobs and start talking with some people in those specific disciplines. And you may be surprised at the people that you actually are able to pull out of there that are already doing the type of work that you've got some interest in and need in terms of filling. I think it's a really underutilized aspect of LinkedIn. So, I know there's a couple of us here that are in HR. There may be others out there listening, may or may not be. But I would definitely suggest bring that back to your team as a strategy, right? I had a situation years back where I had doing some consulting for a company that had some very specific engineering folks that had to use a very specific software package. It's called Delta V. I had no idea what Delta V was. And then I kind of dug into that, and we were able to hire several people by doing that. And I've had my team doing that kind of right along. So again, I offer that as a way to help target. Two other things. One, certainly there was a question about whether or not, when do you use recruiters, right? And there's a lot that goes into that, that decision, right? So obviously there's cost considerations because you're going to pay, going rates around 25%. I've found you can generally pretty easily negotiate that down to about 20%. But there's a lot of other considerations, right? Do you go contingent? Do you go retained? You know, are you talking with people that specialize in that area? Because every recruiter will tell you they have got great candidates for your roles. And for those of you that have put jobs out there, you know, they start contacting you immediately. So always happy to talk with people either offline, or if there are other questions about recruiters. We do use them fairly often, even with some of the things we're doing to try to target. Because when you're talking about some really niche roles, finding them sort of with some of those traditional means just becomes challenging, right? And time can certainly be an issue. So just quickly, I'll move to, making connections for people once you actually have now hired them. Part of what we've been doing for the last year or so, and this even is actually a little bit before COVID, we have in recent times hired, I think, 4 or 5 of our internal sort of G&A and other functional areas totally virtually, which has been interesting, right? Sort of a new thing for all of us. We have been putting together pretty extensive, what I'll call sort of an onboarding agenda. So not talking about getting them up and running on benefits or things like that, but making connections for them, right? We send out to people, here are some of your key stakeholders. We're going to go ahead and help you get set up to have meetings with both internal people as well as some of the folks you're going to be interacting with on an external basis, which again, not rocket science, but the feedback that we have gotten across the board from all of these folks has been tremendously positive. Right? They've said to us, I don't know how I would have been able to kind of get through all of this without having had some of those introductions. Obviously, the days, for at least for now, of us walking people down the hall to do face-to-face intros, are not really happening, right? So it's just, sort of caused us, and I'm sure everyone else out there, to be a little bit creative, about how do you create those connections. And again, it's connections both within the organization as well as making some of those connections with some of the external partners. So I hope some of this, has helped. And again, I know there's some, if people have questions, please feel free to ask them as well. And I will turn it to, I believe, Lorna, are you up next? I'm not totally sure. So I'm going to hope it's Lorna who's up next.